Welcome to the third and final day of the seventh annual Defending the Early Years Summer Institute. My name is Denisha Jones, and I've been your moderator and the executive director for Defending the Early Years. So this year, we selected three key core values of early childhood education and care: equity, truth, and care, and invited early childhood educators, advocates, and activists to highlight how a commitment to each value can support our efforts to resist threats of domination, control, power, censorship, racism, xenophobia, anti-Blackness, climate change, and environmental terrorism. Today's session, Fostering Care for the Environment in Young Children, an Educator's Approach to Climate Change, explores how early childhood educators can nurture environmental awareness and responsibility in young children through a commitment to care. We know how vital it is to enact policies and practices that heal the earth and restore our natural resources. As climate change threatens to wreak havoc on our lives, we must broaden our commitment to care to include caring for the planet. How can our approach to care support children's ability to develop a duty of care to each other and the environment? Panelists will discuss practical strategies for introducing concepts of sustainability and climate care in ways that empower rather than overwhelm young children. Grounded in hope and action, this session highlights how early childhood education can lay the foundation for lifelong environmental stewardship and climate-conscious citizenship. Before I introduce our keynote and panelists, a few logistical announcements. First, welcome back to day 3. Please introduce yourself in the comments, share your name, your pronouns, and where you're from. Feel free to chat with each other in the comments, but if you have a question for any of the panelists and our keynote, please click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. There's a question mark in a little black box. Please go there and please insert your questions. Our staff will be reviewing them and then we'll share them with us, and we will reserve time at the end for a Q&A with the audience. Also, note, we are recording this webinar and broadcasting live to our Facebook page. Next week, we will share the recordings with everyone who registered, and they'll be posted on our website. Would you like to receive a certificate of completion? Click on the link shared in the comments to complete the form, and our project coordinator, Zoe Kim, will send you a certificate of completion. Did you receive our reflective workbook? This morning, we sent an email that included a link to our Summer Institute reflective workbook. You can also click on the link in the comments to receive the workbook. And if you fill out the workbook and send it back to us, we'll give you an extra 3 hours on your certificate of completion at the end of the Institute. Again, if you did not receive the emails, all of those links will be shared in our comment section, and we will send additional emails out next week with the recordings and a link to the certificate form and also a link to the workbook. All right. Now, I would like to introduce today's keynote speaker, DEY National Advisor, Carol Garbodin Murray. Carol Garbodin Murray has a master's in education and is the executive director of the, I should have asked you how to say this, Carol, Wimpheimer Nursery School?
You got
I
it.
got that right? Okay.
Yes.
Carol holds a New York State teaching certificate and a master's degree in early childhood development and early intervention. She worked directly as an early interventionist, infant, toddler, preschool, and kindergarten teacher for many years before becoming a program director and leader in the field. Carol has led campus-based children's programs and community programs for over 20 years. Carol is the author of more than 30 articles published in professional magazines for early childhood educators, and she's also the author of 2 books, Simple Signing with Young Children, published in 2007 by Griffin House Press, and Illuminating Care, the Pedagogy and Practice of Care in Early Childhood Communities, published in 2021 by Exchange Press. Last fall, Carol facilitated our second book study on her book, Illuminating Care, and it was such a joyous experience, and she's got me hyped up to center care in everything that we do. Please join me in welcoming back Carol.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here, to be a voice for care, and to stand alongside, to think that care is standing alongside equity and truth this week is just so powerful. I'm going to share my slides with you. And they are very simple slides. But there is also, can see that now? Everything good? Yeah. There's also a handout that Zoe has prepared for us with all the resources and quotes and everything, because the slides are super simple, just to give us an outline, an anchor for following along. Today, like Denisha said, we as early childhood educators are going to be thinking about care alongside the environmentalist. As we care for children, as we care for our planet, I wanted to start with worth. How do we value care? How is what we value measured? Care is often talked about something that is invisible, so close to us that it's hard to measure. It's assumed. We've experienced that care is split from education, placed subordinate to education, but we know that care is at the center of our work. Care is the web that connects us. Care is a relational way of being with one another, with humans and non-humans. Or as Maria Puede Bellacasa says, more than humans. In her book about care ethics and extending care to the planet, she doesn't say non-humans or other than humans. She talks about everyone that we share the planet with and the planet itself as more than human. I want to tell a story of a tree to illustrate worth. And this isn't my story. This is a story that belongs to the people of Oakland, California. And I first learned about it through author Jenny Odell. She said that the people of Oakland, California, thought that all the trees, all the redwoods were second growth because everything had been taken as lumber during the gold rush. And then late in the 60s, environmentalists discovered this amazing living treasure, this 500-year-old redwood that she called Old Survivor, or some people called grandfather. And Jenny says that maybe the reason this 500-year-old living treasure survived is because it was growing on a cliff in a precarious place, hard to get to. But probably more likely, this tree survived because it was considered useless. It wasn't taken for timber because of its gnarled trunk and twisted branches. Ironically, it survived because it wasn't a product. It wasn't consumed. Brianne Eisner is a care ethicist who engages us on the idea of wealth, of worth in her, in a very tangible way in her book called The Real Wealth of a Nation. She's critical about the conventional model for measuring the wealth of our communities, the GDP, the gross domestic product. It fails to accurately reflect life-sustaining resources for humans and for our planet. There is essentially no care economy. She says, the failure of current economic systems to recognize and value care and caregiving continues to underlie massive economic inequities and dysfunction. The systematic devaluation of human and environmental care lies behind a kind of economic insanity. So we can't talk about care without advocating that early childhood educators receive pay equity with all other teachers. And we also acknowledge, like so many on this week's great discussions have talked about the history of care. The racist and misogynistic history, slavery, bodies treated as property, servitude. Care has not only been invisible, care has been abused and traumatized in inhuman ways. And we can't not just ask, how can we be care advocates? But we also seek to understand how we can heal care, how we can rescue care. Rianne criticizes that current systems for valuing exploitation over preservation. And she maps out a way for us to move from systems of domination to partnership. She points out that, like the old survivor, that a stand of trees, doesn't contribute to the GDP until it is cut down. That's its outcome. I love these analogies with the tree because I happen to love trees. And I grew up in Oregon. I moved around a lot. And when I think back over my childhood, it's really my relationships with trees that ground me. I really can remember and dream even about the trees that I knew as a child. And as an early childhood educator, what joy it is, right, to share nature with children. I think about trees and care and childhood and love and the environment all as one. Now imagine gathering with me around a tree, around a beloved relative. As Robin Wall Kimmerer says, in some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who care for us. We're gathered around one of these grandfathers or grandmothers, and someone tells us that the tree is worthless. The tree is not counted until it becomes lumber. We, like Rianne would say, that's insanity. We could talk about the worth of the tree in scientific terms, about our very breath, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, our reciprocal life with this tree, the rich biodiversity the tree and the forest offers us, not to mention the splendor of knowing this tree, of living near this tree, and the peace and the spiritual connection that we find, that our children find in being in relationship with nature, a part of something bigger than ourselves. We know the worth of life, of play, of childhood, of imagination, of care, of agency, of truth, of equity. And when systems that we operate within don't account for the worth, we seek to change them. I think back to when the term care ethics was coined as a psychological educational body of study in the 70s and 80s. Carol Gilligan was at Harvard with Eric Erickson and Kohlberg, and they told her that boys and men were scoring higher than girls and women on the moral scale, the scales of how we measure moral development. That girls and women couldn't reach the higher states of moral reasoning. And she basically said, but what are you measuring? And how are you counting worth? And that started the field of care ethics. But of course, the people who ushered care into universities and places that are deemed to be the voice of authority, they asked us to recognize that they did not invent a relational way of being, that they wanted to make it clear that care is our humanity. Care is ours. Care is what makes us human. That although the dominant narrative of hierarchies and competition and survival of the fittest has persisted, we know that care, kinship, cooperation, recognition of that web of connectivity, alloparenting, raising children in communities is why we survived. And care is a reclamation. So instead of building our narrative on this investment narrative, a rationale that we will get something from the child, we will get a productive worker, we will get a college-educated citizen, our investment in early education will pay off. Instead of that, we place our value on childhood. The child is worthy. Care is a birthright. We are not giving our love, our care, our education, our attention because we are looking for payback. Our emphasis is not on a transaction. It's not on human capital. our value, our purpose, the worth is as inherent as life itself, as so many have mentioned this week, in our love of children, in our commitment to children. Reciprocity is a central feature of care. And this is a paradigm shift that environmentalists have long asked us to make, to no longer see the natural world as something that we can dominate and control. As Robin Wall Kimmerer puts it, we see the moss, the plant, the trees as our kin. She asks us to dispel the myth of human exceptionalism. And children know this. We know this because we live with children. They remind us over and over again that we are in relationship with all of life's forms: bugs, trees, plants, animals, rocks, rivers. Reciprocity also lifts us, teachers, caregivers, out of martyrdom and sacrifice. Reciprocity acknowledges this dance, this conversation. Care as central to our identity as educators, the intelligence of care, care as education. We understand the inseparability of care and education and the false dichotomy between the mind and the body. In Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about how in the English language, we it the other. We use pronouns that separate us from our plants and animal kin. We speak of the living world as an it. It's a perfect way to talk about something to be used, she says, not something we're in relationship with. When we're in reciprocal relationships with others, we see them eye to eye. We receive the gift of the other. Just like Robin talks about the intelligence of moss, the intelligence of plants, the intelligence of the earth and the rocks, the intelligence of animals. And we talk about the intelligence of babies, of toddlers, of young children. Another key idea when we think about the care that we know and we give to children is this myth of independence, that, as Eva Kate says, human life is embedded in nested dependencies. Eva Kate is someone who studied dependency, and her daughter was born with multiple disabilities. And she talked about that asymmetrical relationship that is a natural part of caregiving. We're usually in conversation with someone who needs something from us. We can talk for the other, or we can lift the other, whether it's the baby or the person with the disability or with the elder. There is a vulnerable partner when we're involved in this caring exchange, and that we don't see vulnerability as weakness. We don't see this vulnerable person as less than whole, but we see this vulnerability as a sign of our human connection. And that the more vulnerable the person we're caring for, the higher our ethics needs to be, so that we don't practice power over anyone. So CARE asked us to understand reciprocity and dependencies in such a way that we are, as so many people have said this week, empowering others, partnering with others, not over, but empowerment with. And we can't talk about care without talking about the body. Nail Nodding says that the way we touch another increases or diminishes their human dignity. I love the things people said this week about policing bodies, about those compliance scripts that we want to ban from early childhood. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, stand in line, crisscross applesauce. A care ethic asks us to respect the body of ourselves, the body of the other. The child delights in their body, and their body is theirs. With a value of care, we're not seeking to be like the big institutional school, but we're seeking a model of community care. People have said to me, but Carol, I'm not talking about the kind of care that you described, this pedagogy and practice. I'm talking about, this basic custodial care, keeping a kid safe and clean. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm talking about too. I wrote a chapter about toilet learning, about nap time, about meals. That's where dignity and agency is first experienced. Care is not a low bar. Care is the gold standard of respect and love. The child is learning in every moment and learning the deepest lessons: agency, worth, empathy, perspective, taking, all through care. I think of Rukia's school in Georgia and the deep experiences she shows us. Um, Food, the lesson of food. The child eats the gift from the earth, food, meals connected to the community, to seeds, to growth, to the garden, to the body. What parallels can we draw from the child's body, from our body, and the body of earth? And the other parallel that I feel environmentalists are asking us to make is this, it looks like I got this, think about time, to think about time. We cannot have a relationship with the planet unless we are spending time in nature. Gary Snyder said, nature is not a place to visit, nature is home. We need to step out of the grind, to consume less, to notice that we live on the planet. And children teach us to move at a different pace, to sit on the grass, to feel the mud, to notice the dandelions growing in the cracks, to see the beetles walking along the path. Care asks us to be present, to see what's in front of us, to see what's around us, to pay attention. I love the way Alison Clark talks about slow in her book of slow knowledge, slow pedagogy. Time is our material. She talks about taking time back. Again, we're talking about teacher agency, aren't we? Timefulness, meandering time, wandering time, detours, pauses in between time, slow as the resistance to the perpetual acceleration of childhood, slow as the resistance to seeing early childhood education as preparation, as getting ready. I think of my friend William Crane, who lives on an animal sanctuary, and he's one of the national advisors. And he says that the children come to the farm and they are engaged, they are engrossed in this almost spiritual observing of the animals, the natural connection that they have, the emotional connection that they have to the animals on his farm. And he says that invariably their attention is interrupted by an adult who says, "What color is the duck? Do you know what animal that is? What does the cow say?" Bill imagines that the questions the children are contemplating in their absorbed attention are more about kinship, and they're probably bigger questions than those that adults impose upon him. So the kind of environmental education we're talking about does not come from a lesson per se. It comes from having time to form relationships with one another and with the planet, to know the trees, to become the rain, to observe the ant, to care for the toad. And I hope all of you early childhood educators know about Tricia Hersey. She calls herself the nap bishop. This goes with our concept of time. She says to reimagine productivity. It's not exhaustion. It's not grinding yourself like a machine. You are born. You are not a machine. Rest. Children teach us about a different relationship with time, and so does nature. And this brings us to the last concept, which is love. And our hearts are heavy. We who are engaged in this life-sustaining work, caring, fall in love. And as we fall in love with children and they fall in love with the planet, we are engaged in this labor of care, and we often feel brokenhearted as well, right? I mean, I think the environmentalists that I'm reading, like Robin Wall Kimmerer and Terry Tempest Williams, always talk about their brokenheartedness, about the care crisis, which goes hand in hand, right, with the climate crisis, the care crisis. That we care so much that we live with a broken heart. We live in a broken world. But that grief that we feel invites us to love once more. And we ask ourselves, what is a pedagogy of love? Bell Hooks has taught us so much about love, how we should not conflate love with care, that love is care and knowledge and commitment and responsibility and respect. What is our pedagogy of love? What is our pedagogy of care for children and for the planet? This is just a poem here to end with by Joy Harjo. And she says, remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars. Stories. Remember the moon, who she is. Remember the earth, whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth, we are earth. Remember the plants, the trees, the animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Thank you, everyone.
Carol, thank you so much for that amazing keynote, for really grounding us in care in so many different ways. I took so many notes and I'm going to get to those. But first, I want to bring in our amazing panelists who are going to each give some brief opening remarks. Our first panelist is another DEY National Advisor, Rukia Rogers. Rukia is the founder and curriculum director at the Highlander School in Atlanta, which Carol just mentioned. The Highlander School is an anti bias and anti racist, nature centered learning community that fosters collaboration and celebration of childhood. Originally a native of Wisconsin, Rukia has worked with young children and their families for over 20 years in a number of ways, including as a preschool and toddler teacher, an altruista or studio teacher, and as a curriculum coordinator for the Clifton School. She has been inspired by the educators of Reggio Emilia, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and many others who saw education as a fundamental right as well as a catalyst for social change. You can read more about Rukia on our Institute webpage. Please join me in welcoming back Rukia Rogers.
Thank you so much, Tanisha, for the warm welcome and introduction. And Carol, I have to say my natural response is amen. Let the choir say amen. I feel so grounded and inspired by your words and inspired to be in this community, given our political climate, to be in a community that wants to discuss care and the power of it and what it could look like. So Denisha shared that my name is Rukia Rogers. I have a small radical school in East Atlanta. We are actually a farm. And I describe myself as an educator, but I also use the word organizer to describe myself, organizing daily with young children, families, and staff. And what resonated with me listening to the words of Carol is how we are so interconnected with this world and this earth, and thinking really deeply about children and our community's spiritual development. Let me say and be honest, as a Black woman living in America, living on Turtle Island, part of my own personal journey and the journey of the school has been to remember and to reclaim which was once lost through colonialism and systemic racism that disconnected us from the traditions of our ancestors. And what does it look like to create a space where we reclaim it, as Carol described, not for consumption, not to just eat, but how do we think of the tree as our sister and the land and the earth as our mother? And that becomes for us being grounded as a staff and being able to have those experiences. And as I said before, to remember and to reclaim I know that the land in where I reside in East Atlanta has saw lots of violence. It saw the displacement of the Muskogee people, the enslavement of Africans. And so part of our work, our daily work, is rematriation and healing. What does that look like to heal what has been lost and to create those reconnections, more reconnections for us? Because if you work with children daily, you know they point to the stars and the moons and the rainbows every day. They are connected to their ancestors. We only have to honor that. And it is for us to remember and to reclaim. So when we plant a new tree, we welcome them with fruit. When we plant a new bush, we welcome them. When we take water, we offer and we say, express gratitude and thank you. When we pick from the tree, we ask for permission. Our children today were working on a food pantry and they were discussing what should be in there. And they said, oh, don't forget the basket of nuts for the squirrels. They are teaching us of their interconnectedness, and they don't make a distinction with the more than human world. We recently were given corn by a spiritual leader from the Muskogee tribe. And it was a huge thing because they had been displaced from this land. He asked us to let the children speak to the corn, let them place it in the earth and talk to it. And when we gave the corn to the children, they said, I love you, corn. I want to grow with you, corn. So it's also, again, in this process of thinking about we can save, but the earth, we've got to love it as well. And we've got to nurture that in our environments and so forth. So I feel inspired in this moment. And this moment also calls us for truth telling in the ways that climate change and environmental education intersect with colonialism, imperialism, and where we have ongoing genocide and Holocaust. That we think of care with nourishment and softness and custodial care, as Carol described. And what if care is also loud and fierce and resistance? What if we care for the children in the Congo and Sudan and Gaza? That their harm that's happening to their bodies and the harm that is happening to the earth beneath their feet is so intolerable that we rise up and care on their behalf. What would that look and feel like? So again, incredibly grateful to be here in this moment, to be talking about care from a place of resistance, the pedagogy of love, and deep respect for this earth and this community here in this moment.
Wow, Rakia, thank you so much. Not only do we get to, I follow the Highlander School, so I get to see the amazing things you do with the young children that you care for, but hearing you talk about it, it's just such a joy and such a pleasure. So thank you. Our next panelist is quite a surprise. I'll be honest. We needed a last minute fill in. So Keisha was on our list of potential speakers. But it came in today. She was able to join us at the last minute. Our very own DEY podcast host and national advisor, Keisha Reed, is joining us. Keisha is the owner of Discovery Natural Learning Center in Adamstown, Maryland. She has been in the early childhood field for 27 years and continues to actively work in the classroom with children 3 to 5-year-olds. I just want to point out that I think 3, right? Monica, I don't know about you, but I think all 3, Carol, Rakia, and Keisha, spent their day today with young children, and now they're here. And this is not the best time for young if you work with young children. So thank you all for just making that ability to get here at 4 p.m. Eastern. Okay, where'd I leave off? Her passion for authentic childhood has led her to found an advocacy group called Play Empowers. You just saw the link for the Play Empowers conference that's coming up in Maryland next month that we're all excited to attend. And so Play Empowers focuses on promoting developmentally appropriate play-based education for young children. You can read more about Keisha on our Institute webpage, and please make sure to check out our podcast. Please join me in welcoming back Keisha. You're muted. There you go.
I am so happy to be here. Hello, everybody. And thank you so much, Universe, for making this happen. Carol, I mean, I'm with you, Rukia. Amen. The whole time I was like, yes, yes, yes. But something that you said about the connectedness of the child and the earth the connectedness that has to be there between the caregiver and the child. It brings me to a stream of thought I had this week while I was observing children just playing outdoors. And it made me think of the amount of trust that has to be there. The amount of trust that first the parent has to leave their pride and joy in our custody, the amount of trust that the child has to have for themselves, the amount of trust that the child has to have for us, the amount of trust that the children have to have for each other, that has to be there before the authentic connections can be built. And from my observation, that trust comes with experience, right? You're together, you're exploring, you're learning, you're thinking, and you're experiencing conflict, you're experiencing engagement, you're sharing together. And through that becomes a steep relationship. And for me, my goal is to allow children to do that in one unison with the earth. And one thing that one of my children said the other day that was so profound, as we were sitting knee deep in mud and water and drenched in sunshine, she stopped and she looked at me. And this particular child is very profound. And she said, "We are nature." And I said, what does that mean? And she said, "Well, we are nature." And then she just started looking at herself and looking at her hands and talking about her veins and the lines in her hands, and then looking at a leaf and talking about the veins and the lines and the leaf, and then looking at the tree and talking about the veins and the markings on the bark. And she just went on comparing herself with different aspects of our playground. And then another child chimed in, and he talked about, when we talk to each other, we talk like this. And he goes, la, 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 hello, goodbye. And they said, but when the birds talk to each other, they talk like this. And he starts tweeting. And then another child chimes in and says, well, remember when we saw that turtle and he had the little turtle on his back? Well, that was probably the mom. I mean, it was just this dialogue about how we are nature. And children have a way of seeing patterns and have a way of seeing things that go together, things that mesh and things that work. So me knowing that, my goal is to have them immersed. It's not a place to visit. I believe Carol said that. It's not a place just to visit. It's not something that you go and you just take from. It is us. It is where we are. It's a part of us. There are so many things that have happened just in our natural experience. In our little yard, we are on a property that's 300 acres, but our playground is a small portion of that. And for some reason, and the children and I are still figuring it out, trying to figure out, for some reason, we have seen more life in our courtyard than we have seen miles into the forest. We share our space with newts, skinks, groundhogs, chipmunks, birds, squirrels. And like Rukia, my kids want to plant extra for the animals. So I might say, oh, the birds ate the blueberries before we can get to them. And I said, oh, well, let's plant more blueberries. And so the last year when we were planting, one of the kids said, oh, don't forget to plant some for the birds. So it's this idea that we are caring for the animals and the world around us. And that can be watering our garden, but that can also be collecting rain instead of using the water from the fountain. And we have talked extensively about how important rain is. We make up songs about it. We feel the rain and we go out and it's a celebration. Oh, you guys, it's raining. Let's go. Take off your shoes. Let's go. And we do what we call puddle hunting. And we find puddles and we dance in them and we jump in them and we talk about how rain helps the earth. And not only do we talk about it, but we go down and we look at the creek, we see it flowing. We look at the pond, we see it filling up. And we talk about the animals that live there. Just the other week in the forest, the children, let me fast forward back to the winter when we were clearing out and cleaning up. We got the firsthand knowledge of why you need to leave the leaves, because I was clearing out the creek. And as I'm clearing out, I'm looking at the leaves and there are these little crawfish, teeny baby crawfish climbing on. I'm like, oh my goodness, guys, quick, put the leaves back. And we were throwing putting the crawfish back and saying, oh my gosh, this is where they live. We can't remove them. So it's that authentic, the type of learning and connection and relationship that is ingrained in you from your experience. I have that because I spent my days out in nature. And for me, my goal and my work and how I help with caring for the earth is exposing the children to that authentic time in with and understanding that they are nature.
Perfect, Keisha. Thank you so much. We can't wait to hear so much more about your program and your conference. We'll be talking about all of those things coming up. But finally, we have one more third panelist, Monica Weedle-Lubinsky. Monica has pursued her love of nature-based education for over 2 decades. She's the founding director of the Association for Nature-Based Education, a nonprofit that offers professional development and community-based programs to cultivate equitable access to nature-based education. As founder and co-founder of 3 forest and nature preschools in Maryland and a consultant to countless others, she is grateful to help people nurture relationships with the natural world as an essential aspect of how we approach education. Please join me in welcoming back Monica.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate being here. Thank you, Denisha, for reaching out. I feel really inspired by all of the words from you, Carol, and Rukia, and Keisha as well. Nature-based education is something that I've been thinking about for many years. And it's interesting to see how people are thinking about it now in the context of early childhood education and climate change. I think maybe starting with the pandemic, even a little before, people started really considering the intersection of outdoor learning and all of the benefits that it has for young children. And as climate change and the political climate, perhaps decisions that are swirling around us are just in our faces, there's no denying that these are all very related, and they have always been, in fact, from the very beginning of these movements in the United States, especially. One of the things that you said, Carol, when you were talking about relationships, that word comes up for me over and over and over again, whether we're talking about relationship between parent as the child's first teacher, an educator or a child care provider, as well as the land. To me, and a child's peers for that matter, to me, all of those relationships are absolutely vital to a child's healthy growth and development. When we put that into context with some of the writings that you referenced from Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, as well as her more recent book about the service berry, and we think about reciprocity, what that really means, it really means that we move away from the idea that someone has something to just give, like we're going to take, right? Whether we're the give and take of a didactic, you're going to give me the answer of 2 + 2, or whether we're talking about, I'm going to gather up as many dandelions as I can because I want to make a bouquet for this classroom. We want to move away from that and think about, of course, why we're doing those things in the first place, but what are we giving? How are we thinking about the relationship or the being that already is present? The dandelion has the purpose for growing. It has its own reason for being. And we can either model and embody what it means to care, that has its own form of intelligence. It has its own reason for being. And we want to be thoughtful about our interactions with that plant. Or we can model to children, it doesn't really matter, and we can just take. Because that's really what we're doing. We're demonstrating that relationship in how we allow children to interact with those things in a very, very simple way. And I don't think that, unfortunately, I think so many of us were raised in a society that really just didn't value or think about things in that way. When I think about things like, I'll use fireflies as an example. I'm seeing lots and lots of movements right now around fireflies and challenges that they're having, or the bees, or the monarch butterflies, or, there's sometimes we pick a favorite species that we just happen to really like. And so people latch on and can care about that one, the firefly. But it really is so much bigger than that. It really goes to how we choose to live and be in connection with our home, with our planet, and recognize that it isn't just one container space that we move from a vehicle to an indoor building to a home or a center. And but we really have to start thinking about our communities and the places where we live in a more holistic way. All of it. Indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, and all the ways that we interact in those spaces, because our interactions are also teaching children. So there's two terms that I'll mention, and I don't want to go on too long, but one of the things that we think about a lot in nature-based education is the idea of an ecological identity. And what does it mean to help a child form an ecological identity, right? We know that we're helping them find their voices and their own interests and helping them to follow those interests and passions, even as very, very young children. And forming an ecological identity is another way that we're helping children see themselves as part of the world. And so how do we do that in whatever setting you happen to teach in, and wherever you are, however many kids you may care for, whatever the staff or the team, it doesn't matter if it's a big program or school or a very small program or in-home childcare. What does that forming an ecological identity look like? And this idea of human nature connection is really well researched and well studied, and it's often that intersection of human nature connection and ecological identity is separate from early childhood education. Instead, what we want to do is think about how are these things alike? How are we giving, I like to use the phrase time, space, and permission. Children need time, space, and permission to engage deeply, to develop their ecological identity, yes, but also to follow their curiosities, to just be, to really reflect, to really spend that time, right? Unhurried. All of us need that, not just children. And I need it all the time. I find myself, no matter how connected I might feel, it isn't ever enough, because like all relationships, I can't ever be done, right? It's a constant interaction. It's a regular interaction. And so, for ourselves as professionals, but also for ourselves, personally, how does that feed into this? Someone used the term authentic. How does this feed into a very authentic way of being with children and nature? So I'll leave it there, but I thank you all again for hosting this wonderful conference.
Thank you so much, Monica. So many great, I have pages of notes here. I don't even know where to begin, but we are going to have a group dialogue, and then we will transition to Q&A. So audience, if you have a question for any of our keynotes and panelists, please click on the bottom of your screen. There's a question mark in a box. It says Q&A. Click there, submit your question, and our staff will send those to us to review later on. But we're going to get into some predetermined questions, although I kind of want to push back on some of those questions I already had predetermined in a little bit. So the first question was, we face a myriad of challenges, both now and in the future, particularly those related to the environment and climate. How can a commitment to care prepare us to face these and other global challenges? However, I feel like I wanted to push back on my own question, because the way Carol was talking about getting out of these transactional things, right? It's not like we do this so children will grow up and fix our planet, right? I wanted to pull away from that. But just thinking about this idea, right? That again, our themes were equity, truth, and care. How can we use our commitment to these values to resist, right, what's happening right now and the global challenges we're going to face in the future that we don't even know, right? And so, yeah, I'll just open it up. But thinking about care, thinking about global challenges, what are your thoughts around that? And I don't know, is anyone dying to go first, or should I just call on some? We've been doing pretty good the other 2 days with people just unmuting and wanting to jump in there. Not today. Carol's first off mute. Go for it.
I just appreciate pushing back. I think it's really hard to get out of that transactional mindset, the human capital, that we have to validate and rationalize why we do this. We've been seeped in that as early childhood educators. Um, so I think it's great to push back and to think, like so many have talked about this week, about how we give children time to follow their own interest, to find that connection with nature. They're going to take us, right? And if it is funny, Denisha, to think about, like, if we have a big agenda about making sure that children grow up to be environmentalists, we might do the opposite of our
Mm.
intention, right? Because we believe that they have to have time to care and fall in love with the planet first. And gosh, there's just like, what, it's right in front of us, the
Mm.
garden, the food, the composting, the trail, the grass. I mean, child is so close to it. It's such a natural, it's the best way to be with kids, to be outside with them and to dream about all of our children having lots of time outside I think would be a gigantic shift.
Mm.
And I think that's where
Yeah.
trust comes in, right? We have to trust that if they have this experience and if they have the time and the space, that they are going to develop those connections. You almost have no choice. Like nature calls us. It is ingrained in us. So it all kind of, it all is a part of itself.
I was going to add to both of what you're saying is it also is our image of the child
Mhm.
and how we view them. What I see children doing every single day is showing empathy for each other, and that is extended to the natural world, that is extended to the animals as you described in your program, and that as they stand for each other, right? We talk about the anti-bias education goals, them being able to act, that they also will act, and they do act on behalf of nature. And they've shown us that time and time again when they have the time and the space and the connectivity. It's there.
Yeah, I part of me when I was writing that question, I was thinking, I think a lot about Greta Thunberg, right? I think of her a lot because of she's just this amazing young climate activist. But I also, right, I don't think we can force children to be another Greta, right? And I think, something you were saying earlier, the brokenhearted, she was brokenhearted by what's happening in our planet, right? And that led her to be this wonderful activist and doing. And I think a lot of kids are feeling that, right? They're feeling that brokenheartedness, but they also need that connection. What I'm hearing, they need that connection, and then it's out of our hands what develops from there. But time and connection. Monica, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, because what Rukia was saying about empathy, that is, I think, such an important part of what nature-based education also offers because of that relationship with the natural world. And empathy is at the core of, well, being a kinder, more respectful person. And that empathy is just crucial. And I think if we focus on relationships and not so much, how are we going to hope that these folks are going to steward our planet better? Of course, we hope that that's true. But David Sobel, in his book, he wrote a little essay called Beyond Ecophobia. And if you've never read it, it's a great read because he talks about in early childhood, middle childhood, and late childhood ways that children make connections with nature. And in early childhood, it isn't about doom and gloom. It isn't about rainforest, deforestation and glaciers melting. And it isn't about that. It's about place-based, where you are, noticing, following that wonder, spending that time to build a relationship, falling in love with nature before we ask children to save it. So we don't have to feel like we have to put the weight of this very grown-up, very heavy, broken-hearted world on small children. Instead, we can just focus on the joy and the curiosity that they do bring to their explorations, because in time, they're gonna hear it, they're gonna learn it, they're gonna know it, but it should be developmentally appropriate. So I would just say that empathy is really a root of that, and I appreciate the mention of that word.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I do want to point out, someone in the comments said, yeah, there are many Gretas around the planet, and that's true. And it's funny. I've only been following her more recently because of what was happening around the work she was doing in Gaza. But she's actually said that, right? Like, why am I'm not the only youth climate activist, but I've been given the privilege to really be speaking and being on stage when there are so many people like me from other countries, right, who are doing this work to youth who are trying to protect their lands, indigenous folks from around the world, but they don't get the same type of airtime, right? Ask Greta the same type of privileges that she gets. So thank you again for mentioning that. Um, so yes, I hear a lot about connections, about empathy. Keisha, you mentioned trust, and I wrote trust in big capital letters because I've been saying this, and I said it yesterday, and I say it again and again. I think one of our major issues is that we do not trust children.
Yes.
And if we don't trust them, then they can't ever learn to trust themselves. And I think that's really crucial, right, to think about that. So connections, empathy, trust, time, right? The time and the space to kind of develop for themselves. What does it mean? I love what Monica said there, that ecological identity. Do a lot of work on identity and haven't really thought about that, right? But how does that develop for young people? So I also want to talk about care. I mean, we love talking about care if you're not aware. And I want to thank Carol again. I've always said early childhood education and care, but even just recently after the book study, really pushing back because I did harbor those like I didn't like the term daycare and childcare, and I'm even pushing myself back on that because there's nothing wrong with caring for children during the day, right? Days of care, right? And Carol has helped me to see that because we know care often receives a bad rap in early childhood education because it's often associated with something demeaning or inferior, right? So, how can a commitment to care, as I think Carol said, something like the greatest, what was it, the gold standard of love, right? How can that commitment really support us in our mission here at DEY and everyone who's in our audience, right, to ensure that all children have a just and equitable early childhood education? How do you see a commitment to care? How do you use your commitment to care to make that reality happen?
I think we need to amplify our work. I think we need to amplify the care aspect of our work because that is our work. I mean, that is our job to care for and love and support the children that are in our care. And part of what we have to do is make that role clear to administrators, to parents, even, and to the community, because for so long, preschool or childcare has been preschool has been very education focused, and for many they think that the care aspect and the education aspect are two different sets. You know, you're either learning or you're getting cared for. And what's the reality is, learning can't happen without care. If a child is not cared for, if they don't have what they need, if they don't feel loved and secure and safe, and if they don't trust, they cannot learn. So I think that getting that message to the forefront and really focusing on the joy, also focusing on the conflict and the challenge and the love and the real life that happens within our programs will help people understand the value of the care part of our work. It's so rich. It like you said, Carol, it's intangible. It's like almost something you can't express and explain. Like love, care is vital.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think about amplifying care in the everyday work, and the stories I hear about care. Right, Melinda's gonna probably hate me for telling the story again, but I remember her posting. Melinda Marshall runs a family child care program in upstate New York about a parent who came and dropped off a child and sort of fell asleep in the drop off area, and she kind of like just threw a blanket on her and left her there. And I think of that care and how much that parent needed that just sleep for whatever amount of time, right? That's a really simple thing of care, but we don't really think about that, right? Or Carol told us during our book study how she actually, what was it, you were working with a student teacher, I think, and she thought you were going to talk about the lesson, but you didn't talk about that. You talked about her hands and how she used her hands very carefully with the child, and the teacher was kind of like, the student was kind of shocked that that's what you were talking about, but it got her to see her movements in different ways and very caring, and so it's those little things we do which we don't even think about, right? You're gently stroking the cheek, or you're putting your hand on top of this, right? But like amplifying those, I agree, it's so super important. And it brings back to me the dignity to the work too, which I think
Yes.
is super important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How else do you guys use care to support your work and your mission?
I think that like it's all around us, these ideas, the language, right? Language is important. And so we understand, like I think all of us who care understand some of the traditional slogans, like we're not babysitters, we're teachers, and this isn't daycare, this is preschool. Like we understand why educators have had to say those things. But I think we just want to be conscious of the way we might be contributing to that narrative that care is less than or care is separate. So I've been trying to think about how to language it. And I've been reading Peter Moss, he always says education and care, and he is saying that we need to call ourselves teachers, early childhood educators. We need to claim that. We need to work towards parity with all other teachers. And as we do so, we need to talk about care. We need to bring care to the front, right? Don't let them split us again from education and care, because we know the result has been this schoolification model. And this like glorification of the little scholar instead of the child, the child at play, the child being cared for, the child caring for, the fish or the frog or the garden. So I think like I'm just trying to think about how we can say like talk about what we are, not what we are not, because we need to put our arms around the babysitters and the grandparents and the teenagers and the whole community that families need to care for children. I was a babysitter. Most of us were babysitters. That was our apprenticeship, right? That's how we learned about family systems. That's how we learned about babies. So how can we have this care conversation and help people see that care and education are inseparable without trying to other and separate and uh, further divide education from care, divide the mind from the body, especially for the youngest children, right? The youngest children, this dichotomy that the care is somehow only about the body. It is an intellectual exchange. Understanding the perspective of another is thinking, it's empathy, like we've been talking about, it's dignity. So I'm always grappling with how to talk about it.
Yeah.
I
I was just
go
gonna,
ahead, Ricky.
I was just gonna add, Keisha, both of you mentioned like this interconnectedness, how care is the foundation of our work. It's not only like the teacher, but also when we talk about, again, anti-bias goals and social justice, when I'm in conversations with teachers and colleagues, how does a child know that you're going to show up for them? How do they show up for others? And it's the ways in which we are responding to their rights, their needs, to their cries. We, in community, we are forming their identity. We're forming collective identities. And for me, the empathy, those are the roots of social justice. You can't have these other quote unquote lessons without knowing I'm in a space where I'm known full well and I'm loved full well just for my sheer presence on this earth. As you said, Carol, not about what I can do, about becoming a worker, but just my flesh on this earth and all of our interconnections. So for me, when we talk about care, it's the root, it's the base, it's the foundation of all of it.
Yeah, so super important. Monica, you wanted to share something?
There's so many different
I
tangents here,
know.
but one of the things that was coming to mind was the word professionalism, and it's kind of a weird concept because we're talking about authentic relationships and our way of being and showing up. So really what we're saying is we want to be in real and authentic relationships with children. We want to honor those children. We want to honor these relationships in the places where we live and within our learning communities. That includes the families, like that beautiful example that you shared with the blanket. And I think that we do need to be sure that educators view themselves as important and that they have important things to say. You know, when a child has an interaction with another child and there was a little light bulb or some kind of aha or some kind of reflection that feels important, as an educator, we need to know that that's valuable and it's worth sharing. It's not, so, you know, so I think some of this too has to do with making sure that educators feel like it's not a silly little thing, it's everything. And we want to share those things out because we're constantly educating parents about what matters. If we say that interaction with the ladybug on the stalk and the other child, and if we take the time to tell that story, that's also placing emphasis on what matters. Well, guess what? Guess what your child was learning in that little interaction. Here's why that matters, right? And it goes beyond science. There's something more there. So recognizing, yes, that those things are healthy for development in many ways, but also seeing that it's important to share and it's worth sharing. It does matter because we need parents to see how important those kinds of things really are if we want them to take nature-based education seriously and this kind of whole wraparound ethic of care.
Yeah, I really like that because along with what the lines of what Rukia and Keisha said and Carol said, care is the foundation, right? And so if we step up and show everyone that our job is our work is tied to how we care for each other, right? Care for the children and show them that, right? Then it helps, right? It helps to model that. And then it looks like caring for a ladybug or caring for an ant or caring for the birds that are eating your blueberries, right? Or caring for the crawfish that are hiding in the leaves, right? It all kind of develops in that, but it's got to be a fundamental thing that we all accept and proudly embrace, right? Like someone in the comments, Carol in the comments said that she, after reading your book, Carol, she called herself a caregiver as her title, right? She's getting more into that. And it's interesting that we use that title a lot for caring for the elderly. And it's not really seen as such a bad, I mean, in some places it might be, but most people understand that, you know, we adults are going to get age and get elderly and need that support. But we talk about caregiving, right, in terms of them, but not in terms of little children. And I think it goes back to the point Carol was making that we're more focused on them getting out of this stage and being someone else and not taking the time to really ground ourselves in this very special moment called childhood, right? And how we need to fiercely protect that, right? And I think it helps to think of that shift, right? The now, the grounding and the centering of us. So that's great. Again, we've had some questions in the Q&A, but keep adding them. We're going to get to those shortly. I have another question before we transition, though. And this is really, I think about this in a lot of different ways. So agency came up on Monday. Jennifer Keys-Adair co-wrote a book about segregation by experience, and she talked a lot about children's agency. And I talk about it being very bidirectional, right? And it's hard because a lot of times we know early childhood teachers in general, but I think especially early childhood teachers don't have any agency. And that's not an accident that we care for young people who also lack agency. And then as the people who care and educate them, we don't have agency, right? But I found in the work that I'm doing around play that when teachers, you know, use play, give children more agency, they kind of reclaim, right? Carol talked about Claire's reclamation. I see them reclaiming their agency as well. And so I think about care as a way, caring for others, creating a pathway to receiving care, and how much we and you guys as early childhood educators and caregivers and advocates and activists need that reciprocal nature, right? So can you talk a little bit about how your approach to care, your commitment to care has maybe opened you up to receiving care and what that, if you think the reciprocal nature of it, right? How did that show up in your work and what does that look like?
When before we even got to this is where I wanted to go. So I'm really happy because you were
good.
talking about, we were talking about caring for children and parents and all these different things. But one thing that I see developing in children is about them developing the ability to care for themselves as well. You know, there's so many adults who don't care for themselves, and you cannot give from an empty vessel. So to learn to care for yourself at such a young age is a lifelong skill. And one of the things that that is important to me is to instill autonomy and that sense of agency. So, in listening to your body, one of the kids looked at me today and said, "I'm hungry. Can I go get my lunch?" I said, "Of course you can get your lunch." And then he said, "Because I'm listening to my body." So it's this idea about having access to your food when you're hungry, having spaces to rest when you need to rest, and listening to your body, not getting that information externally, and watching children taking that time to use the bathroom when they need to use the bathroom, eat when they need to eat, sleep when they need to sleep, and speak up for themselves when they need to speak up, advocate for themselves, demand consent, ask for consent. All of this is taking care of themselves, and that has seeped into the adults in the program. So I've always worked in programs where there's a lunchtime and we all eat together, and I love that. I love that sense of community. I love feeding children, and that was my initial plan with this program. And it just didn't work out because the children did not want meatloaf in the middle of the day that the chef was cooking. But when the shift happened and everyone has access to their food when they wanted to, that was something that we had to consider for the adults as well. I don't eat breakfast in the morning, but I drink coffee. But that means that I'm hungry for lunch at 11 and everyone else isn't hungry till 12:30. So that was a conversation that we had. How do we maintain this professionalism and stay in the role, but also take care of ourselves so that we can take care of the children? And I think that that is worth thinking about.
I will always forever share my experience visiting your center, the other one before you open the current one, and the experience of a boy witnessing a young boy at 9:30. Yeah, we got there at 9:30. He sits down and starts eating out his snack box, and I'm like, Keisha, what's he doing? And she's like, he can eat what he wants. I'm like, what do you mean? He just got here, and she's like, so, and then it dawned on me like, who am I to say that this boy doesn't feel hunger? I don't know why it doesn't matter. She looked at me like, who cares why he's hungry? He can just eat. And all day for the 3 days that I was there, the kids grazed from their snack boxes and they sat together in the classroom in the one room I was in and had a group meal. But like, they didn't need permission from anyone to eat when they were hungry. And I remember just being like, I've never seen that in my 20 years in the field. I taught kindergarten, I taught preschool, and it was like, snack time. I'm not hungry. Stop what you're doing and come eat because I'm telling you to, right? And so it's a foundational shift. And I know talking to people, well, they're like, well, I can't do that. And I'm like, are you sure? Because you think you can't do that, but maybe you can, right? Maybe you can set up this policy of what that might look like. So thank you for sharing that because I think that's powerful. Who else would like to share about the reciprocity of care? And I think caring for ourselves as adults is super important. Yeah.
I hear all the adults here like setting priorities, Keisha's cleaning out the creek or the pond, and Rakia is in the garden, and Monica's with those kids and the ladybugs. I just think that when we do what we love, it does refuel us, right? So I think that is a part of our agency. I mean, even if we can only carve out small little parts of the day to attend to something we love. I know for me, just watering the plants at the school or taking care of the guppies, these things that kids also love to do. I'm doing to create a living habitat in my school, but it is bringing me joy. And this whole idea about slowing down, like, can we do that without adding something else? Like, okay, now we got to practice the slow pedagogy. Geez, what else are we going to have? It's like, can we do that in a way that as we care, we are cared for? Can we embed our values and beliefs in the care of others in such a way that we feel that that reciprocity, that care has that regenerative? It's hard because our systems are broken. And if you've changed 10 diapers, you don't feel reciprocal, we're working in this broken system, in this broken world, but are there little pieces of the day when we can rest with the children, when we maybe sit down with them and eat with them, while we're rubbing their backs, we close our own eyes, or we tell a story instead of reading a story because, that presence of care. How can we embody that so that we ourselves feel more whole while we're doing this work?
Mm. I
I
mean,
think
I think
this,
me and Monica. I was going to say, I think this is an ongoing question because it's the work can be so, it is emotional, it's physical, and it's something we've had adult conversations around. What does that look like? You know, how can we shorten our days? How can we slow down? How can we you know, it's not to say we're not quote unquote teachers, but maybe like the paperwork, let's put it to the side for a minute and be present with the child. I've thought about continuing my education, but if I go on, it's going to be to study herbs and herbalism. Because as we walk the land with the children, we're making lotions, we're making mocktails, and talking about how the lemon balm is calming. And we have 2 elderberry trees, and the kids will talk about, oh, it helps you when you feel better. So we're also, again, as I mentioned, remembering, reclaiming how this earth cares for us and how it takes care of us. But it's honestly a process we're learning with children and holding power with them and collaboration because they know things, honestly, I didn't know when I was 4. It wasn't deemed as important to know the benefits of mint or rosemary or things like that. It's a different way of knowing.
Yeah.
Our favorite plant is the plantain leaf. You get stung by a bee or you have a mosquito bite, the children will go running and they know what to do and they know how to care for each other. And it's caring for each other using the earth. So it's this again connectedness that's just there when you spend the time in nature with children.
Yeah, I love that.
I I want to point out, going back to the idea of self-care, care for ourselves in the midst of, and trying to embody that so that we can, again, help children to grow up to be people who see adults who care for themselves. I do think that it's a struggle. It's really hard. It's really hard because we find ourselves caring for so many other kids and people. Um, one of the, well, a couple of things. One is, I think by bringing reflective practice to the forefront of what we do and really encouraging teachers to pause at the end of whether it's a class, a segment of your day, or the end of the day, really making space for some reflection. And even if there's some guiding questions that you kind of kick around with a co-teacher or a colleague, or if it's personal, independent, but that reflective practice can become like a form of care. It's demonstrating how we want to do better and show up better for children, and it's forcing us to really pause and think about really our own needs. What else, right? Or what was missing, or what could be different, so that we're showing up in a wholer way. Another thought is with nature-based programs, we frequently do a sit spot, which is just a mindful practice, and it can be done with, toddlers right on up to older kids, even if it's a 2-minute long period of time where we're all sharing this time outside together and we're breathing in deeply, we're noticing how the air feels, or we're noticing that we're under the leafy tree, or we're noticing there's something moving right here in the leaves, but just pausing, engaging our senses, and taking those 2 minutes or those 5 minutes. The children love it and they get really, really great at it. And they'll tell you how important that was to them. But as your own self-care and for your own personal nature connection, it's really important for adults too. And the third thing I'll just say is, if you don't, maybe you carry a journal or a notepad, but if you haven't tried carrying around just a blank sketchbook, I find that if there's that moment where I can be calm and quiet and make my own observation of something outdoors alongside a little child who might be watching, or a couple of little children who might be noticing. But for me, that feels really filling. That feels really meaningful to just, if something's, catches my eye and I just feel like I want to sit with it and notice that it has the 3 leaves around the base of the plant, or notice the bird that's in the tree and I just want to make a little note to myself or make a little drawing or do a little experiment with the berry that I just found or whatever it happens to be. But even just that, it doesn't have to be this big grandiose gesture, but to me, and so you may have something different, right? We all have different things that feel filling. But I find having that blank nature journal just available is a nice way to model for a child. Pause, notice, like spend time with that thing in nature, whatever it is, if it occurs to you. So those are just a couple of ideas, anyways, regarding self-care. But to me, I feel like it's again another one of those things where it's a work in progress, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I hesitate. I get self-care. We have to take care of ourselves, but I ended up doing a lot of research on the impact of COVID and teachers, and I felt like self-care was kind of a cop-out. Like it was a way to say, well, you just got to set better boundaries and take better care of yourself. And let me tell you, there's not enough self-care in the world to help teachers get over what was like teaching during the pandemic, how awful that experience was for so many of them. And so but we still have to care for ourselves. Like a lot of them struggled, a lot of the teachers talked about the struggle of the balance between being a teacher during the pandemic and being a mom or being a parent, right? And how they were struggling to do both. They felt like they can only do one well, right? And I remember the same way feeling like just struggling being a human, like watching the devastation and then also like being a daughter, being a person who has feelings and thoughts, right? It gets really challenging. And so I imagine, I know for educators, especially early childhood educators, it's also very challenging because, like Carol said, you change 10 diapers, you don't really feel joy sometimes and care. But how do we recapture that, right? And so you guys shared a lot of good ways, taking time to notice, right, to stop and notice how you interact, and to really think about the relationship that you have with those children and kind of wondering along with them and noticing things along with them are really good ways to do that. Great. Well, we have a lot of questions piling up. So let's see. I will start with this one because Rakia, it's for you. Rakia, when I first learned about your school, I was so moved by the name you chose for it. Could you say a little bit about why you chose Highlander? How does it connect to rematriating the land, remembering our legacies, and collective conversation to empathetically move forward socially and ecologically? That's a big question. You're still muted. See if we can get you. Usually I can. No, I can't ask you to unmute. So hopefully you'll be able to get to that.
I'm so sorry about that.
No,
Perfect. In a new setting. So just
Yeah.
briefly about the school, the Highlander School, spent a lot of time thinking about the name. When I was first opening the school, people suggested a learning academy and so forth because that's what parents wanted. But really set upon the Highlander Folk School, which is what we're named after, which was founded in 1932 by folks in the Appalachian Mountains. They were organizing around worker rights. It was a place where Dr. King, John Lewis, Rosa Parks all went to study nonviolent resistance. It's it's incredible to me how much it was so inspiring to hear the stories of their work. And the Highlander Folk School, it still is in existence and organizing folks again now more so around queer justice and environmental justice and so forth. And I would say, again, it's been an evolution for us. I think when we first opened our doors in the school, 2013, we were really paying attention to racial injustice. And we considered ourselves to be a nature-centered school, but I think that has evolved. And I think listening to the words of like Angela Davis, who talked about no matter what kind of social justice work you do, we have to have a sustainable planet. And that made us, I think, pay attention in a deeper way. So I think that our practices have evolved over a decade, but definitely being inspired by those activist organizers from the Highlander Folk School, and then just kind of evolved and continued to be inspired by folks again like Angela Davis and others, environmental activists, and again, our relationships and reclaiming, remembering, working with spiritual leaders from the Muskogee tribe, working with African spiritualists to form and shape some of the lived practices within our school.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Highlander School and the work that they did. I remember when I taught a unit on cooperative biography in Rosa Parks. We talked about her time there, and it was such a huge place for so many activists, right? That we all know of, Ella Baker, right? All of these folks who went to the Highlander School and got a lot of training when they in their youth, right, to really engage in that work. And so, yeah, it sounds like the perfect name for the place that you run there, and that's amazing. All right. We've got some questions about, well, all right. We got the first question, which is like generally the question you get a lot. And I understand this question, but I know it's tough. But it's one of those, because we are now in a space in education that's driven, standards-based, teacher-directed learning, how does one incorporate these developmentally appropriate opportunities into the classroom environment, particularly when one is confronted with challenges and barriers around children, allowing children to explore and follow their curiosity? And so I do preface this. I understand that this person may or may not work. Like I always say, I think all three of you are in private childcare centers where you are, you're not connected to the public school. I won't say you're free to do whatever you want, because that is not what it used to be in private childcare, as we know, but you are carving out spaces for that, and not everybody is in that space, right? Most of my childcare teaching was connected to a public school, pre-K 4, or university, right? And so even universities may or may not be following state guidelines. So we recognize everyone's in different places, but people are always looking for tips when they feel like the hammer's on them saying, no, follow the scripted curriculum, no, do this, no, do that. What are some advice and strategies that you might offer to a person in that situation?
I am just really moved by sort of how the educators who are speaking now are bringing their values, to, in care and in justice to their work. And I do think that even in a system that requires us to teach with scripts and standards, that the kinds of things they're talking about can match up to standards, um, and really centering care is a way that we can do that. That we can talk about the the what is a child learning in the garden, about the life cycle of a plant, about science, about where food comes from, about decomposition. If we need to bring these terms, the mathematical sequencing and literacy terms. I think that I don't think anyone can argue with us to say that the tangible life of the child, that what is in front of the child in play and care, could not be linked to standards. I know so much is about interpretation, and I'm so sorry for the pressure that so many people feel. But again, can you carve out a little piece of your day that is rooted in care and play and nature? And do you have a way to talk about it so that others understand the inseparability of play and care and learning?
Yeah, yeah. And someone else mentioned another question about the power of documentation, and I want Keisha to share this story, because I asked Keisha one time, you take in student teachers, and they have to develop lesson plans. How do they develop lesson plans in your free play program all day? I don't know if you remember the response, but maybe if you talk about that, because I think so. What you said, right? You have them. They're in the classroom with the kids all day, and after they're done, they sit to write down what did they do.
Yeah.
We have to change this idea that we walk into classrooms and teach young children, and instead what we do is walk in and document and observe what young children can do and will do all day when they are given the time and space to do it. That is the learning, right? And when you're documenting that, you're seeing, oh, what else might bridge the gap, right? You see, oh, they spent hours doing this, trying to figure this out. How could I introduce this thing that they need to get to the next level? And then you bring that into the environment, and then you observe and you document that, right? So it's really flipping it, right? Because we know the learning is happening. We know standards are being met when children are outside in the mud with a hose digging for worms. So many language, cognitive, right? Social, emotional, math, science, all of those. But we don't see it because we feel like we have to teach it directly, right? So how do we get people to like turn into this lens of observing and documenting what the children are already doing as proof, right, that the learning is happening?
Well, I worked for many, many years in very traditional programs, and I knew I didn't fit in, but I did the traditional thing. But I always pushed back. And one thing that I did that I think opened the door to more and more was I advocated for a wild day. Can we have a wild Wednesday? And I think it started first, it was once a month. And the parents would dress the children for mass. They would bring extra clothes. They would do all the things that maybe they didn't think that they would be able to do daily, but they were willing to do it once a month. And just planting that seed and doing that observation work and that documentation work and posting those documentation boards in the hallway and getting the conversation started and asking questions and posting the question on the board and having the parents have conversations about what they were seeing really created an uproar at the program. And it started to get more families saying, well, when are we going to do that again? Well, she talked about that all night. So next thing you know, it went from once a month to maybe every other week. And then it was every week. And I think if you can advocate for at least this, like starting in the corner, as Bev Boss says, like if you can just advocate for a mud table, even if it's just International Mud Day and you do it that one day and then you document that day and you really shine a light on the joy and the experience. And then if you need to, the learning that happened. I think there is room for us if we push back a little bit.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely finding ways to push back.
And
You guys keep going at the same time. Rukia, you can go first.
I really want to strongly emphasize what you talk about, the documentation, the noticing of children, again, rethinking the image that we have of children and it could be video recordings and studying it together with families, communities together of what are you noticing is happening in that space. So not even treating as though some families don't know, but also trusting your families that they can help you to document. What kind of questions are they holding? Are you holding? Maybe there are questions like we have a fear around language and literacy. Well, let's notice together what is already happening in the classrooms and so forth. So I think really bringing families and your community and partnerships with you, and I couldn't emphasize enough what both Denisha and Keisha have already said in terms of documentation, observing children, and using many different methods to do that. I mean, I think the only time we will engage in what I would call direct instructions will be if it's something that comes from the family that is kind of ancient, like making tamales. You kind of need an elder to help. How are we going to pick the collard greens? Let me see.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful moments. But make it a process, again, full of joy and going back to this thing of like, again, not children just being consumers and workers. Like school is not just to churn out workers, but to, again, honor them just by their sheer purpose on this earth.
And who they are right now.
Yeah. Yes, who they are right now in this moment. Yeah. Monica, what were you going to add?
well, I wanted to make the point about circle time because I think that I see a lot of professors in early childhood education when they observe student teachers, they are putting emphasis on an observation of a circle time a lot of times, as if that's where the real learning is happening. And I think that that is perpetuating the issue. If you really view play as learning, which it is, then you should care how the totality of the experience has been or organized. What are the bounds that the teachers operate in to facilitate that learning, not to give direct instruction? So I think that's sort of that's a really important point. And I also think that goes back to this idea of play and not separating out play or learning. It isn't either or. And I think in terms of just, nature-based play and nature-based learning, we get this question a lot, which is, asking us to validate it and link it to standards. And I want to lift up a program that we ran for 5 years in a Philadelphia Title I school, and now we've run for 2 years in a Baltimore Title I school, starting with kindergartners and having the teachers bring the children out for a 2-hour block of time once a week to engage in open-ended nature-based learning. So teachers are really actively learning how to map it back to standards, how to map it back to curriculum that's very tight curriculum. It's very hard for them to get permission and to carve out time. They have a lot of pressure to get kids to perform and achieve. And yet we see huge gains when the children have this space to play and learn in this way on their school grounds. So it happens in very formal settings too. It can, but it does mean that we have to be willing to think about it differently, right? And not see it as an either or, but okay, how can I creatively think about what my school values in these standards and in this curriculum, and think about what does that look like when it is nature-based, open-ended, playful, and outdoors.
Allowing
Mm-hmm.
the children to meet their natural urges and needs is caring. It's care.
Yeah, it's care. Yeah. Yeah, I want to share too. It's happening in public schools. I work with a program called Hatch Partners in Play, and they run a play lab program at a public school in Pittsburgh, predominantly African American children in kindergarten, first and second grade. The first 3 teachers of the cohort were. So we saw play, and it was protected play. Started about an hour a week, then it was an hour a day, and then maybe even 2 hours a day. And I was like, wow, you guys are really letting play lab go on here. And the teachers felt, especially the second grade teacher, that the learning in the classroom was way better when they had more time for play lab. And when I originally interviewed him and said, think about how much time your kids have to play right now. Is it just right? Not enough? Too much? And he said it's just right. And then a year into the program, he's like 2 hours, kids are there, right, doing play lab. And so it can happen. And then my other thing, and this is the professor and me, but I think teachers have a tool at their handbook, a tool that they can use to kind of overcome any nonsense they're getting pushback, and it's called teacher action research. And so I've had to scaffold teachers on doing these projects as part of their master's degree at Howard University. And I can imagine if every teacher did this without the pressure of getting a master's degree, right? That they just understand that you can study anything you want in your classroom by posing a question and setting it up. And if you were to study, right, the impacts of play or nature on some variable, pick the variable, whatever you're interested in, and say, I'm going to study this for 2 weeks. We're going to do this. We're going to carve out this time. We're going to have this intervention, and you measure before and after. You're giving people the language they want to hear to justify anything. You're talking about pre-skills, post-skills. You're talking about an intervention. You're talking about frequencies, right? If you're checking behaviors, you can say, I saw a 60% decline in this behavior after the intervention, right? If you're talking about writing, you could say that, you saw students use 60% more letters and words in their writing and their reflections after, right? There's a lot that you can do to study, and I don't want to take too much time on that, but it's something I'm working on and advocating and hoping to work with more early childhood teachers on studying the impacts of play in their classroom through teacher action research. All right, this is a question I kind of really love. What are some favorite children's books for opening up conversations about care with young children and families? I know you guys got tons of resources, so say them slowly because Zoe is going to magically look them up and find the link to drop in the chat. But yes.
Okay, so if they're asking for children's books, I'll just say one, and it's one that makes me cry every time I read it. And I think it's called Guess How Much I Love You. I think it's maybe Guess How Much I Love You, but this is how you'll know the book. There's a child sitting on the bathroom floor with a roll of toilet paper all over the place. So look for that book. It makes me cry every time. And it's all about care. It's about the parents caring for the child from infancy on up. And then it's about that shift when the child then has to care for the parent. And it is the most beautiful book. And when the kids pull that book out and bring it to me, they say, here's the book that makes you cry. And they ask me, why does it
Dana.
make you cry? And we just talk about the beauty and the beauty that's there and how it touches my heart. So that's a book I would say.
Awesome. A few people have shared the title, I Love You Forever by Robert
Yes,
Munch.
maybe
Yes.
that's it.
Guess How
No,
Much I Love
no, it's
You, and
Guess How
the
Much I
other
Love
one
You. Okay.
is The Bunny Mama. Okay, so there's two different books, but we'll get them in there and we'll get them
Okay.
out to the resources tomorrow. But thank you for sharing that. And can I just say, another great memory from my time visiting your program is I sat on the couch in the library the first day, and I literally got handed maybe 15 books, and I was just reading and reading, and like the kid would hand me a book and walk away, and I would just keep reading, and another kid would come and hand me a book, and they might stay and they might go, and I was just reading and reading and reading. And then the other 2 days, I sat in the same spot and no one handed me a book. And it was like, oh, but it was like that day they were hyped. And I was like, man, I'm just like, I got my teacher voice on. Let me just, and I'm telling you, like, and I'm not used to like letting a kid run away from me in the middle of reading. And I just kept going because that's what we do here. It was one of my fondest memories, right? Like just that, but how it shifts, right? And it wasn't something we forced on the kids. Oh, come listen to me read. It was like, no, you read because they ask you to read, and you don't read when they don't ask you to read. So that's great. What other books? We got some popping in the chat. The Other Way to Listen by Bird Baylor. Me and My Fit Spot by Lauren McLean. What if everybody did that? Any other thoughts on books that you might recommend? Children's books for families about care.
This book I'm there was more about community care, and I can't remember the exact title, but give the police departments to grandmas or grandmothers. I searching to give it back. And it's also just reimagining what community care could look like. And I will research that and then add it. But that's been something we've been reading a lot with the kids. And they'll chant, who takes care of us? We do, we do.
Yeah. Let's see. I also want to check because I know Megan's in the audience, and Megan is some of her books might be about care. I would think the First Conversation books by Megan Madison. I'm trying to. I know. Our Skin is the one I usually think about. We Care, a first conversation about justice, right? That might be a great book to look into. And so, and yeah, and there's a whole bunch of, I didn't know there were so many books in the series, Megan. Wow. I just went to the website. So if you go to Penguin Random House, and I'm sure we'll get the link in there to the First Conversation series, 12 titles now in the series, some in English and some in Spanish, which is amazing. There's a book called Together, a first conversation about love. Just lots of great books in the series. And so I just wanted to mention those two. Any others that you can think of, and then I'll find our next question.
Someone just put All the World in the chat, and I want to second that book. That's a beautiful book about community and care. Love that.
Okay,
I think
awesome.
when you have that lens of care on, that just so many of the good children's books give you opportunity to talk about what it means to care. There's one that's really popular right now and with our 3-year-olds. It's called Best Friends by Margaret Chodos. And it's actually about conflict. It's actually about conflict, but it's a simple book. And it just leads to thinking about care. How do we care for one another? And I think that's like, when we think about our rules at our school, it's like, how do we care for each other? You know,
Yeah.
how do we care for each other? And how do we solve problems together? So many books that aren't explicitly care books are giving us just good stories, right?
I think that's because care is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's embedded in everything that we do. So even if the book doesn't say care, it's gonna have care in there, right? So we've gotten some more great titles. All the World by Liz Garten Scanlon. Megan did mention her book Yes, No. Made her think about Keisha talking about consent. And so that would be a good book because that is a book about consent. We have another author here, Margot Ford Cross, who shared Mirrors Up. It's a book about affirmations. And so all of these links will go out to you. Let Me Hold You Longer by Karen Kingsbury. Kindness Makes Us Strong. I Think You're Grand by M.H. Clark, lots of good resources. Michelle Hemingway said, Death is Stupid is a beautiful care book. I've not seen that one, but I definitely am interested in all these titles. Geraldine, one of our staff members yesterday, said we could do 2 more days just on the reading materials of this institute, because these past 3 days, it's been a lot, right? It's been so much. So please keep sharing those books, those care resources, add them to there, and we will make sure that they get out to everyone as well too.
And I think
Um,
that's
yeah,
a concept of care. It's that we're present and we don't turn away. So the books about death, that's a perfect example, right? When we are creating these communities of care, we're not afraid to talk about death and dying and poop and bodily functions and so I think that it's if we see even superpowers, when children are playing out these themes of power and rescue and danger.
Danger
It
and
really
rescue.
is about care. It really is.
Yeah.
Care is
Yeah,
everywhere.
it made me think of Vivian Paley's book, what was it? Bad Boys Don't Have Birthdays, I think is the one I'm thinking about. Really good, powerful stuff. But even like older kids, I always share the story because my kids were younger teens when I first adopted them. But I remember them playing in the pool and they were acting out scenes of rescue, right? In the pool, in the water at 14 and 12 years old, like, oh, I'm coming, right? And so it still shows up in our everyday play, even as young adults, right? Young teenagers, that this idea of caring for each other and rescuing each other and taking care of each other. And I remember in that moment thinking like that there's a level of resiliency there, right? Because the kind of trauma that we know kids have, and that's one thing we haven't talked about, is care in relation to trauma, right? And the trauma, we talked about trauma yesterday. We might have talked about trauma a little bit on Monday, right? But it's something to think about, right? Because, care is kind of an antidote to the trauma that a lot of the kids are struggling, and how they might need that care or express that care. We talked yesterday about how play is a way for kids to act out the trauma, right? So you can imagine, right, kids using care in their play, right, to kind of address the trauma. I remember we had this little boy in a preschool I was directing at in California. And I don't know. I don't know. I was new, and so I didn't see it, but everyone was like, there, he was giving them bad vibes that he was this little bad kid in the making, right? Because he just seemed so like, I don't know, he just didn't seem to care about anything, I guess, was their thoughts. And then one day we watched him outside, like take a baby doll and give it a bath in the water, and they had never saw him in the peaceful, careful mode. Like he cared for it, he washed it, he wrapped it, and like all of their bad thoughts about this child kind of disappeared seeing him in this new light. And so it was so important because he never had an opportunity to show them his caring side, right? And so just being able to see kids from those different perspectives are super important. Wow, there are so many books in the chat. It's just popping up. A few people asked about trust. They said it's not really a question, but they talked about trusting children. We've talked about that, nurturing reciprocity, a more non-transactional way as we build relationships. That same person asked about documentation, and we talked about that, not just to make the learning visible, which is the language you use to the people who are demanding that you do that or facilitating the learning, but documentation of what the children are engaged in, like what they care about and what matters to them, is still important. Yes, it can be used to prove learning goals, but it's also worthy in its own intent. But then someone else talked about trust, touching children, and how trust is linked to the devaluing of children as being fully human, or humans in general as implicitly valuable, which is a deeply embedded tenet of white supremacist patriarchal global culture that we live in, right? So I wanted to come back to this idea of trust and care and how we think about those two, and the importance of them in the work that we do, and in the work in engendering, caring for the environment, right? Global environmental stewards. Yeah. You look like you're bursting to say something, Keisha.
I just think that I can give the example of when new children and families come to the program.
Okay.
And before the child has made a connection, before they have gained they don't trust this place, you know, they come
Yeah.
and they're just unsure, but really taking the time to sit back and observe. And I have witnessed many children's moments where they have made a connection, whether it be to another child, a material, a certain spot on the playground, myself, when they made that connection, and you can almost see their armor go down and their trust rise up. And there is a shift, a total shift in the connection between the child and yourself. So I think if our first goal is not to meet standards or follow the lesson plan or to do the curriculum or even to prove to parents that the child is learning, and our first goal and our first communication with parents and our ongoing communication with parents and our ongoing goal is to have authentic connections, maintain, not just develop and earn their trust, because this is not superficial, maintain and nurture the trust that you both have for each other. I just, that is where care lives. Like that is where it lives. I wanted to say too that when we talk about documentation and communicating with parents, and I did a big shift from my past documentation being very focused at points, very focused on what the child is learning. What is the outcome? What is the product? I talked about the process, but it was very much the end result was what the learning is. And I did a big shift, and I went through this stage where I wanted to focus on the child in that moment, what they're saying, what they're doing, and not really trying to predict what they're thinking, and not really trying to focus too much on what they might learn or what the product or outcome might be or what the agenda could be. Just let it be what they're doing. And the beauty of it and the different lens that it's required me to have is it has shifted and kind of given me a rebirth. So we talked about caring for ourselves and like feeding that passion and that hunger, and that did that for me. Just really shifting from the extrinsic and like, oh, well, what does that mean? Oh, and really just looking at it and connecting with being one in that moment with the child, connecting with that experience they're having. So to me, that's important.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you.
I think about the everyday moments, too. It's like around this idea about like kids come in sometimes because they haven't had a voice, or they come in without, they haven't had a voice, they haven't been heard. So you're serving lunch and they're like, I don't like that. Yuck, get it away from me. They have to scream and shout, I don't want that, because they've learned that that's the only way their voice will be heard. So if we start in those quiet moments of saying, oh, you don't want applesauce today. Okay. Maybe you'll try it another time. And we hear the child that says, no, thank you. I don't want that. I just like thinking about sometimes the way we treat children is so embedded in a cultural context that we don't even see it. Like I was noticing once at the very beginning of the year, the teacher was going around to each child asking if she wanted a handful of pretzels or whatever they were having. And she was saying, okay, then what do you say? Say thank you. And I was like, but the child doesn't know you. She just got to school. It's September. She's hungry, and she has to say thank you before you're training her to say thank you to get this pretzel. So sometimes we don't even think about how trust is born in the child from those very small moments where the child has autonomy to use their voice. Again, what Rukia says, what is your image of the child? That the child needs to be trained, that the child needs to be compliant, needs to be polite. We all have good intentions, but in care, we can let the child have agency and voice, and that's going to build trust and also build trust with the families.
I was going to add, when Carol spoke about trust with families, when I think about trust, it's really that interconnected relationships with the families, because I feel like we have to build that even before the child comes into the program. or the family comes into this space. Very often in the Southeast, for example, in our infant spaces, we will have Black and brown families that won't enroll their infants and toddlers. They don't want to enroll them until they can speak, because they've got to have trust. And so a lot of what we do, whether it's the tour or home visits, or they're not sure, I've even learned, okay, I'm not telling you have a 24-hour, or I'm not telling you have to make a decision. Let's make sure this is a right fit in our shared values, because in many ways, you're modeling for children the relationship between staff, educators, and families, what trust means. So we're just not going to pluck you up somewhere and drop you off. We're going to respect your relationships that you have, your attachments that you have, and carve new pathways for you to form new relationships and new attachments. For us, I think really deeply about the relationships to the family in this period when they first come to us, particularly.
Love that. Yes. Monica, anything else? Last thoughts? This has been amazing so much.
I think that we can learn so much from spending that time in outdoor settings and in nature and getting to know the places where we live, getting to know the plants that are under our feet every single day that we never took the time to notice. I think starting from that kind of relationship for us as a teacher, or as just you yourself building your own relationship with nature, in your own relationship and connection with nature, that is going to improve and enhance the relationship and the care and the trust that you have spending that time with children outdoors as well. So I think it's all related.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That is going to wrap up. I'm going to share a couple of announcements at the end here. But first, I want to thank Carol Garboden Murray, Rukia Rogers, Keisha Reed, and Monica Weedle-Lubinsky for joining us for day 3 of the DEY Summer Institute. Thank you so much. You shared so much great knowledge, and we're going to add as much as we can to the resource document for everyone. And anything else that you want to share, please feel free to send us the link and we'll include it. But thank you guys so much. Well, folks, believe it or not, it has come to an end of another DEY Summer Institute. 3 days of early childhood educators, activists, and advocates talking about why we do this work, how to sustain ourselves in this work, and why it's really the utmost importance. I want to end by sharing a couple of resources that we've recently shared from DEY. So in case you are not familiar with it, I want to start with our most recent toolkit, Linking High Quality to Child Development and Advocacy Toolkit. We recently shared this toolkit to go along with the campaign we launched last year on in defense of early childhood education and care, restoring the link between high quality child development. There'll be a link in the chat to the toolkit webpage where you can download each page of the toolkit as its own resource, and then the entire toolkit as well too. We took our 10 statements about what we know about child development and put together a collection of resources for you. We're also sharing those in our Reflective Practitioner series on our Patreon. If you're interested in that, you're still time to join. Another resource that we just started that I think goes along really well with what is happening today is our Threat Watch Alert. So we've had our advocacy map up for a few years now, where we highlight all the different advocacy that's happening locally, statewide, and federal level impacting early childhood education and care. But given the concerns of what's happening and how rather quickly it's moving, we also are creating a Threat Watch Alert. So if you click on the link to that page, you can subscribe. Well, right now we're starting weekly, and we might change the frequency. We'll be doing weekly emails where you can get those Threat Watch alerts sent directly to you. And there's more to come on that. And then lastly, earlier this year, we finally released our Fostering Healthy Identity Development in Young Children, Affirming Race and Ethnicity in the Early Years framework. So it's a framework for early childhood educators, advocates, parents, and caregivers. It is a free resource, a labor of love, and it's on our website. And there's also going to be a link in the chat to that. So thank you all so much for joining us. Please be on the lookout for the emails You will get emails with all of the videos from the recordings. You'll get the workbook if you haven't gotten it already, and you'll get the link to fill out the certificate as well too. Thank you all so much, and please enjoy the rest of your evening and keep doing what you're all doing in support of young children everywhere.